Okay, so I'm really delighted today to welcome Deepa Kannan, who I had the privilege of studying the Food and Spirit qualification with a couple of years ago. And Deepa is an Allied Functional Medicine Practitioner and a Functional Nutritionist, and she practices in India and also does help clients all throughout the world. So we're really lucky to have her talking to us today. And I'm going to be talking to Deepa today because my focus for this month is on what I call creation energy. So this is the second type of energy that I work with. When we did our Food and Spirit qualification, Dr. Deanna Minnick calls this one the flow energy. But it's a really important one, especially for women. And I mean, I guess it's just as important for men as well, but women are my target clients, I guess. There's, really make up 95% of the people that I deal with. So I really wanted to get a more scientific, nutritional perspective, and especially talking about hormone balance, because I think that this is something that can affect women in very significant ways, even when they may not realise that that is what is going on for them. So thank you so much, Deepa. I'd love to get you to just talk to everyone about, I guess, how you came to be doing the work you're doing now, and just tell us a bit about exactly what it means to be a functional nutritionist.
Thanks, Arvind. Such a pleasure to be here and talking about my favorite topic in the whole world, which is women's health. And I think that's something which I'm so passionate about. It's also because when you asked about my story, I'm actually here today because I suffered so much with my health. I think that's what brings all of us to this space. But I particularly suffered with hormonal issues right from my early years, and this affected my skin and immune system. I had frequent UTIs, and it was such a hellhole for me that I just resonate today with women who talk about suffering from acne or rashes and UTIs, hormonal imbalance, which can affect fertility, mood. So somewhere along the way, when I had my son about 10 years ago, and he was born with a genetic condition where his adrenal gland is dysfunctional, so he's a steroid dependent child. And that's actually when my own health took a turn for the worse. So because I was running to the emergency room in the middle of the night constantly, so that actually tipped the scales. We all have this, functional medicine calls it a trigger, a big event which tips the scale into disease, and that's exactly what happened. So that's how I came into the work. So I actually started studying nutrition based on the principles of functional medicine to support my son's health and prevent. And then, of course, pleasant surprise. And then after which I joined you in the Food and Spirit program. And then beyond that, I also am a certified bio-individual nutrition practitioner, which is a little bit more about specialty diets. And we can talk about all of that in the context of women's health. So that's my story in short.
Okay. And for those people who don't know, can you just tell us quickly, first of all, what functional medicine is? What does that mean?
Excellent. So functional medicine is a system which looks at the interconnection of different systems. So it's going back to actually a lot of Eastern traditions like Ayurveda that disease doesn't originate and stay in one system, and everything is connected. So how do you look at the whole person and then understand all the different root causes which brought that person to a particular state of health, symptoms, or disease? And how do you start to change the terrain of that person by understanding these root causes? And this allows you to actually alter the person's body in a way where you're not trying to just attack or target one symptom, but rather you're changing the person as a whole so that they're no longer susceptible to those same challenges. So it's a very large emphasis on understanding root cause and addressing root causes through different ways. The first is just to identify what is the inflammatory factors in that person, because it could be different in everybody. For example, even if you take a woman's condition, let's just say endometriosis, two women with endometriosis are not ideally the same person. So you have to look at what are the root causes which brought the first woman there and the second woman there, and that can be different. And I think the flaw in healthcare is that we are boxing people and even conditions. So we are trying to treat a condition or a symptom rather than understanding that person. So that's the first way. So you identify what's inflammatory in that person, and then how can you remove those inflammatory sources? And you're giving an opportunity to them to heal from within by taking off the inflammatory load. And then the second thing you watch is to look at what is that person deficient in. So deficiencies could be multiple things and not just nutrient deficiency. For women, it could just be a deficiency of having their own time, of having calmness, of having adequate sleep. And then so usually when you look at what's inflammatory in that person and what are they deficient in, and you address these two things, most people come back to a state of balance, and you don't even need to look at the specifics of that condition or disease. Sometimes you can go further into those specifics, but most often when you've looked at these two things, which are a great deal in themselves, you've already allowed great opportunity for that person to come back to a state of immense balance. And the body has the immense potential to heal itself.
Totally agree with that. Absolutely. So, you mentioned that with your son, you were going to the emergency room all the time. So I'm just curious to know, how were you introduced to this more functional approach? Is that because it's more common in India that people have an understanding of Ayurveda and that kind of approach?
That's a fantastic question, and it's got me thinking. Although India is the land of Ayurveda, you'd think that disease and symptom were very few, but in fact it's rampant everywhere. And that's also because people have actually gone away from this thinking of interconnected systems. So it's also, while it's similar to Ayurveda, I think functional medicine does go in a little different way as well. For example, in Ayurveda, it's not common to look at vitamin and mineral deficiencies and correct them. So it's more about working with herbs and roots and Ayurvedic medication. So in a way that this is a symptom, so functional medicine is looking at the approach through macronutrients, micronutrients. How can vitamins be used in therapeutic doses to bring about some sort of healing? So it's, I wish I could say that India was the land of Ayurveda and symptom free, but sadly it's not.
Okay. Good to just hear that. So how did you come across functional medicine? Was it just, you know, that kind of desperate search to help your child that made you look outside the square? What introduced you to it?
To functional medicine, I did somewhere along the way that my son would always get very sick when his stomach was upset. So we would invariably have other challenges. He would have seizures, he'd have high fevers, his steroid would have to go up. So I started to think that why is there such a link between stomach issues and such severe symptoms like seizures? And this is where actually Ayurveda does say that if your gut is not healthy, then everything else is not healthy. So then I said, how about something where you're looking at the right kind of food so that you prevent this person from getting gut distress, and thereby could that help everything else? So when I actually came into functional nutrition and I heard the saying that the gut is the center of so many things, it was a real aha moment. So it was to me that, see, this is what I've been thinking deep down in my intuition. And this is science clarifying that. So it's making sense that I've come into this path.
I do want to get into the hormone imbalance issues for women. So is it common that the health of the gut will really have an impact on that? What's the interrelationship between a healthy gut and hormone balance, if there is one?
Can this be a very long answer, Arvind? So, okay. So, okay, let's think of a building with different levels, okay? So the foundation is blood sugar balance. Now, how do you get blood sugar balance is through what are you eating? So the gut is so sensitive. And what triggers an immune response in the gut or inflammatory response? And I'll come to this a little later, because 70 to 80% of the body's immune cells are actually within the gut itself. So let's begin with something which is a bit of a joke I hear from a lot of friends, is that they joke about things like having bloating and it's just those mild tummy troubles. And it's never that, because if your gut is not in a state of balance, nothing else comes into balance. So your gut needs to first of all process, digest, absorb and assimilate the food that you're eating in the right way. Now, so many things are involved in that, as you know. So let's just first break it up into the 3 macronutrients. So if you take carbohydrates, proteins and fats, now when you eat food, the first digestion of carbohydrates begins in the mouth itself, and a little bit of fat digestion, and then so you've got the protein has no digestion in the mouth. And then when it comes down, it comes through the tract, and then when it enters the stomach is the first space that protein starts breaking down. So you have to have a stomach that's amply acidic, and that's another thing altogether, because there's rampant overuse of antacids and they're being popped like candies. So the stomach actually has to break down proteins, and then when the food comes into the small intestine, then the bile and gallbladder release bile to break down the fats, and the pancreas release enzymes. So there's so much that happens in the small intestine, and it all depends on what has happened above that. For example, let me give you one example of fats. If your stomach is not amply acidic, and your food is not acidic when it reaches your small intestine, then the brain doesn't send the signal for the gallbladder to release bile to break down the fat. So you see there's a connection, there's a feedback loop between the stomach and the small intestine. So everything matters right from the top. And if you want to have optimal absorption in the small intestine, it depends on everything above that. So once the food is digested, if it's broken down and if everything is in a microscopic level, then it enters the bloodstream so that you can use it as nutrients. If it's not microscopic enough, and this is where foods like gluten and dairy become a problem for hormones, is because it's not microscopic enough to enter the bloodstream. So instead it enters the lymphatic system, which is at the start of the small intestine. And the body thinks that it needs to detoxify the substance, but instead it goes and clogs up the lymph channels. And then of course that impacts everything. So then you get cells start sitting in their own waste, and I'll come to how all this affects hormones. But so first of all, for you to use your food the right way and use all three, which is your carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, you need to have optimal digestion top to bottom. So every part of the digestive system needs to work correctly. If you have issues with stomach acid in the stomach, then you'll have issues with breaking down protein. If you have low stomach acid and the food entering the small intestine, you won't release optimal bile, so you'll have problems digesting fats. Now, if you can't digest fats, then you're not going to be able to have healthy hormones, because your fats are the building block of all your hormones. So even in the world of low fat diets, that's a deadly thing for hormones. So if you see then how the gut is interlinked to hormones, is first is simply because without breaking down correctly, you can't make use of it the right way. Then once you've eaten all these foods and you're able to break it down, if you've got food that, if you've got a meal that is balanced with the right amount of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vegetables for vitamins and minerals, and colors for phytonutrients, then you've got yourself a right foundation to build blood sugar balance. Now, what is blood sugar balance? Is if you eat some food and then your body breaks it down and the blood sugar spikes, then insulin comes like a key and it takes hold of that and it pulls the energy and delivers it to your cells. If you have blood sugar that's spiking too sharply, then what's going to happen is also going to crash very sharply. So hormones should be like the waves gently moving on a calm day, not a tidal wave that's crashing and rising under a full moon. So it needs to be very gentle waves. So if blood sugar is stable, then your adrenals start to stabilize. So that's the next level. If you got stable blood sugar, then you've got stable adrenals. What is the adrenals? The adrenals is a little gland that sits on top of the kidney, which the outer shell of the adrenal gland makes cortisol and aldosterone. Now, cortisol, people think is just the stress coping hormone, but it also regulates blood sugar. It has a whole load of functions which are critical. Aldosterone regulates sodium-potassium balance, and this is especially important to women's health if you don't want to have puffy waistline where your pants don't fit at many times of the month. So it's critical. And a lot of times women actually try to stress themselves out so much by doing 100 sit-ups to reduce that belly fat, when it's in fact water retention at certain phases of the cycle, or it is simply excess cortisol from imbalanced blood sugar. Now, blood sugar and cortisol, if you noticed, I said blood sugar is the base and adrenal sits on top, but blood sugar and cortisol are two sides of a coin. So if blood sugar spikes too sharply and then it crashes, when you tip into low blood sugar, then cortisol spikes because your body thinks you're in a state of emergency. And this is also what happens many times in the middle of the night when women wake up at 2 a.m. and not able to go back to sleep. That's usually blood sugar imbalance when it's crashing in the sleep and cortisol spikes before it should be spiking to wake you up. It wakes you up thinking that you need food, you're in a state of emergency. So you see there's blood sugar balance, then on top of it, if it's balanced, you've got balanced adrenals. If your adrenals are in a state of balance, then your thyroid hormones become regulated. And then on top of all this is the regulation of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So if you want optimal hormone balance, you need to be looking from the foundation, which is gut health and blood sugar balance.
And I guess I'm especially interested in things where, like you said, people just think, oh, this is you know, how this is normal. This is what every woman has, is bloating at certain times of the month. So those things that people do just kind of disregard and wouldn't necessarily think that they might feel just so much better about if they did something about it. What are those, the most common symptoms, and especially those that women might not realize have that underlying cause of hormonal imbalance?
Yeah. So the thing is that the hormones influence every other system. So you'll find that a woman with hormones that are out of whack will see the impact at different times of the month in gut health. So it could be, it's again a bidirectional axis. So gut health influences hormones, hormones influences gut health. So you'll definitely find that sometimes closer to ovulation, digestive weakness, so stomach acid will downregulate. You'll have difficulty breaking down certain foods. You'll have indigestion. You'll have gas and bloating, low motility, so constipation, which again triggers further hormonal imbalance. So gut issues for sure. And again, there's ways to work around that. You can always go with the cycle and eat a little differently at different times of the month. But if your hormones are well regulated, some of this can be avoided. And hormones definitely play a very big role in the immune system. So which is why you'll find that you feel like you're getting stuffed up and sinusitis flaring up just before a period. Or especially if immune challenges, like if you're prone to acne, skin, then there'll be different times based on how the hormones are. So some women will break out with cystic acne premenstrual. Some will break out very badly at ovulation, which is really a time where culturally you're supposed to look your very best to bring about fertility, but that's the time they'll suffer with the worst acne, and you really don't want to be that way. You should be a shining best. And there are some women who'll flare up at post their period when the hormones have dipped again. So then there's also challenges like migraines and headaches, which a lot of women go through. So they'll have terrible headaches just after a period. And very often I find that women who struggle with headaches post a period are either those having challenges with liver and gallbladder health and unable to digest fats and use it, or many times it's people who are on some sort of a restrictive diet where they're very low in iron. And so the moment that stores empties, then it triggers discomfort in the head. So a lot of inflammatory issues and immune system related. And then, of course, related to detoxification, you'll find that certain times of the month constipation gets really bad, and that can vary woman to woman. But usually before a period, even women who do suffer from constipation will find for a few days that they don't have constipation, and that's usually in yoga science. They'll say the downward energy gets strong to start a period, so then constipation also gets eased. Then of course you'll have multiple issues with energy production, so suffering from fatigue at certain times of the month, definitely post a period when you've lost all those iron, minerals, and unless you are replenishing it in the right way, eating the right foods through your period, then you don't go through those things. But also finding terrible energy dip for even 1 week or even 10 days before a period, where you're literally struggling to keep up with life. And of course the society is also putting a lot of pressure on women, that women themselves are resisting trying to ease down and slow down at certain times, because why should I be different? I'm also I'm no different from a man. And this can actually be a little bit self-destructive. Honestly, I find that before my period for a few days, I ease back on all my to-do list, and then I actually ask for help. I lie down, I watch what I want, I relax. And I think that self-indulgence is very critical to how you go through the period. If you're saying I'll do everything and I'll run, then you're going to find that crash. And mood and brain health, again, deep connection with women's hormones, because for this, of course, I'll have to go through a little bit about how the hormones go through the month. But a lot of women don't even know that in the first half of the cycle, you only have estrogen. So you produce estrogen in the follicular phase, and it's only when you ovulate and the corpus luteum bursts and releases progesterone. So you have progesterone and estrogen in the second half of the cycle, which is the luteal phase. And if you produce progesterone, progesterone is what goes and touches neurotransmitters like GABA, which are responsible for not feeling anxiety, for feeling more calm, feeling relaxed, and feeling like the world is not against you. So if you want to feel all that in your mind and in your mood, you need to be having healthy ovulation. And this is where, Arvind, I keep repeating in so many places, because I had a woman who joked to me that I don't plan on birthing human babies. What she meant was she loved dogs, she didn't want babies. Now, even if someone doesn't want babies, they do need to ovulate. They do need to ovulate to produce progesterone, because progesterone is your calming hormone. It helps you sleep, it keeps you free of anxiety. And as you know, a lot of women globally are suffering from anxiety, and then taking anti-anxiety medication, which is fine in the short term, or if you have done everything else and then you want to support yourself. But if your starting point is with anti-anxiety medication, that's a little, it's a challenge for sure, because even here in India, my problem with many organizations is, I ask somebody, how do you check if a woman has depression before you put her on any medication? And then I said, are you looking at what's deficient? Are you looking at inflammatory markers? They don't look at any of that. So they're putting women on these medication without correcting some of these, which are just basic root causes of anxiety and depression, such as poor omega-3 status and B12 status, iron status. So without looking at those first, so deep link between hormones, vitamins, minerals, brain health. So it's almost a triangle there. And sleep, how can I forget sleep? Because women's hormones regulate sleep in such a big way. So if you take sleep itself in the first half of the cycle, you could have challenges with sleep because progesterone is not there, and estrogen, if you're estrogen dominant and premenopausal, that's the time that estrogen can trigger hot flashes which keeps you up at night. And in the second half of the cycle, when you release progesterone, typically you should be having great sleep because progesterone helps you calm down. But also progesterone raises core body temperature. Core body temperature and sleep are balancing scale. So if you have temperature, you will fall asleep. So it's a bit tricky there. But progesterone in the second half of the cycle is definitely supportive to great sleep.
What do you think are the key, most simple things that in general a middle-aged woman could do in a preventative way that you use within your practice to try and manage these things? Now, obviously, you know, we're not giving medical advice here. We would definitely urge people to have a consultation, a private consultation themselves, because everybody is different. But I guess I'm just looking for, some, you know, key takeaways that people can get from this interview and, you know, potentially implement for themselves pretty much straight away as, you know, preventative measures and just things in general to help them balance their own hormones, especially obviously using food, but any other tips that you would have?
Okay, so I'll give you under the principles of functional medicine, every protocol can be divided into 10 things. I'll list these out first and then I'll detail each of them quickly. So sleep, relaxation, exercise, movement, nutrition, hydration, stress, your resilience to stress, relationships that you have with people, and your network or your community. Now, these are all a little different, so I'll explain. So sleep, of course, is key. So I feel that unless you got sleep sorted out before doing anything else, work on your sleep. It begins with sleep. So you have to find everything that you're doing wrong towards having poor sleep. And of course, we can't go into sleep because that's really long, but finding ways to support sleep and finding ways with a relaxation to you. Now, it does not need to be if your spouse is sitting and meditating. It doesn't mean that you have to. If you can't relate to that, that's perfectly fine. Maybe you relax with just listening to your favorite music, or maybe for you it's to just put your feet up and watch a favorite show. That's fine. But whatever it makes sense to you, where you're just letting go and blanking out. And exercise and movement is something that I always differentiate, because these two things I feel are clubbed together and there shouldn't be. So exercise can really be about strength building, cardiovascular health. It can be so many things where you're improving cardiovascular health and blood circulation. But movement is a little different. Movement could simply be jumping on your rebounder for 5 minutes for encouraging lymphatic circulation. Because as I said, the lymph system is also very critically connected to hormones, because the lymph carries fats. So it's very much connected to the hormones. So you can't be counting jumping on a rebounder or trampoline for 5 minutes as your day's exercise. And that's where I differentiate the two. And then when it comes to nutrition, just look for blood sugar balance, and that is so simple. Simply look at your plate. It should have fat, fiber, protein, and color. And about the half the plate should be 2-3 different colored non-starchy vegetables. and half, which is about a palm size, should be protein, which can be, if you're not eating animal protein, then something like lentils or beans. And then you have at least a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons of a fat, a healthy fat like coconut oil, ghee. Of course, coconut oil is a bit controversial today, but there's a lot of people in functional medicine who say it actually increases lipopolysaccharides in the gut, and it impacts the microbiome. But I think that goes back to whether your ancient culture ate coconut oil. So if you're living in India, I don't think it's going to affect you if your ancestors have been eating it all along. Then you have what it takes to break it down. So then you've got to have enough. So if you've already covered your plate with half of vegetables, that's got your color and fiber linked together in one. Then you've got the protein, fat, and then you can have a half of the plate as a non-glutinous grain, or even a non-grain complex carbohydrate like sweet potato or yellow pumpkin, tapioca, yams. Yams are actually, progesterone is manufactured from yams. So yams are actually very good for women's hormones. And so if you just see that your plate has, and many times in India, you can see a lot of women eating mono diets. So if you see their plates, it's just sugars in different kinds. So they're not at all bringing in the fats, the proteins, the color. So it's pretty much the same. And the other thing, as you know, Avan, I think variety of color makes a big difference. So if you're simply staying with the same 2-3 vegetables the whole week, just by varying that, you'll get so many nutrients. Now, hydration is another thing that I have a joke on my Instagram about the 4 kinds of water drinkers. I don't know if you saw that. And I called one the person who guzzles all day long in big amounts, so even through the meal, so it dilutes stomach acid when you have to digest food, and it makes you gassy. Then there's somebody who drinks water like they're on a desert, so they feel they don't have access to water, they are parched all day long, and then in the night when they have immense thirst, they're gulping it down, and that actually makes them wake up because they need to use the restroom. So you need to drink your water the right way, away from meals, copious amounts of water, and stopping water intake by 7 or 8 p.m. And then if you look at stress and your resilience to stress, so you definitely have to find there's also the link that if your hormones are out of whack, your resilience is very low. So you'll tend to erupt easily. So it's again a bidirectional, but stress is very important to address, because I'm not sure if you know that cholesterol from fats is the building block of both cortisol and progesterone. So if you're in a state of high stress, your body will prioritize cortisol production over progesterone, which means that month you won't ovulate and you won't make progesterone. Instead, your body will ramp up production of cortisol to support you in that stressful situation. So reducing stress in whatever way you can is a big step in improving progesterone production and optimizing hormone balance and reducing estrogen dominance. And of course, there's a link between whether you feel isolated. Now, why did I say relationships and community? Is because I don't know if you know, there's a deep connection between oxytocin and cortisol. Now, love and touch and good relationship release oxytocin, which is anti-inflammatory, and stress releases cortisol. So they actually go with, they have a axis which is like a balancing scale. So if you have a loving relationship, great friends, and you release oxytocin optimally, then you naturally downregulate cortisol production, which means you can cope with stress better, which means you can make better progesterone. So managing, having great relationships and bringing in a form of loving touch is critical to increasing oxytocin and reducing cortisol.
Many middle-aged women that I deal with also complain about aches and pains, joint pain, and not as, a serious thing necessarily that they'd even go to a GP about, but it's just a constant thing. And again, it's another one of those things that people feel like, oh, this is just a natural part of growing a bit older. Does that, is that affected by hormone balance?
Oh yes, for sure. I think it has a great connection between liver health and lymphatic system, lymphatic congestion. So if the lymph is not moving and it's congested, that's the first reason for pain, because the lymph is so intricately connected to the immune system. So the first thing you have to look at is that person having movement? Are they moving their body? So it doesn't make sense to be even looking at deeper aspects and protocols if someone doesn't have exercise and movement in place, because I've seen a lot of middle-aged women where I've tried everything and I've done everything, but in the 6 months they haven't done 1 day of exercise. So until they've prioritized exercise and movement and you're making sure that lymph is circulating, then you don't need to look at something else. But the liver health also plays a big role in how inflamed you are and how whether you have joint pain. So if you are having inability to digest fats, or if you are having bad quality of fats from a lot of fried foods, which also is something many women seek out in premenstrual if they have hormone imbalance, then you will definitely feel pains aggravated. So usually I tell women, until you've optimized the liver and until you've got the lymph moving, you don't need to go looking for pain medication or exploring it further. So first get to the basics. And this is something which is not going to cost you any money, just to move in some way. It could be going for a walk. And I'm a great one for walking bare feet if somebody has access to a place they can, because I truly feel the difference is almost like acupressure. There's a big difference in the immune system and how you feel pain-wise of 1 hour of barefoot walking versus 1 hour walking, say, on a treadmill. Then again, a treadmill is better than doing nothing.
Absolutely. And I think, there's all the benefits of that direct contact with the earth and, reversing the effects of being around electronics and pollution, that balancing of ions that we get from barefoot walking as well.
Yes.
I just think, absolutely. So many benefits of walking barefoot.
Yes.
So something else is, and I know that it's all related to everything else you've spoken about, but many women as well also complain and again think that it's a normal thing that they're going to gain weight in middle age, and especially in relation to menopause, which obviously has a big change in hormones when we go into menopause. So what would you say would be, given that somebody is eating a balanced diet, they're making sure they kind of have their plate looking like what you described before, with lots of veggies of different colours and good fat and some protein, and they're moving as well, what else would you suggest for women who feel like they just can't move weight that they've put on, or that they are continuing to gain weight as they get a little bit older?
Well, I think they do need to look a little deeply at their thyroid, because perimenopause and menopause, the time the thyroid gets a bit dysfunctional, and then it usually comes back into regulation. So they must keep checking on these parameters. That's critical. And I know it's very frustrating for a woman who's doing everything right and moving, eating a healthy diet, still not losing weight. I would say that if they are post-menopausal, then fasting is a great thing to include because it quickly optimizes how your body moves weight around. But as you know, that fasting for a menstruating woman can be very stressful, and many women can't cope with it unless it's done the right way. So what I found is that even though intermittent fasting is so big today in functional medicine, there's so much research being done, I find women struggle with that, and especially 16-hour fast, even when they're eating high fat. So I find that it works better for women to find one day of the week and see if they can just skip breakfast and lunch and eat an early dinner. And it's easier to do this if they're not drinking fluids. I'll tell you why. People think that it's easy to fast if you're drinking water. It actually gets more challenging because you lose electrolytes when you pee. So if you are doing a dry fast and you're not doing anything, in fact, you don't even trigger hunger. So once that you've lost that window of the time you normally eat breakfast, your body actually forgets that you have hunger. Same happens at lunch. If it's around 1 o'clock, for a little while you'll feel hunger. Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, gets released because of memory. So I find that for women, it works better to do a dry fast once or twice a week, even once a week, and that itself moves how everything else works for you the rest of the time. And this works especially well if you're past menopause, because then you're not in fact, at that point, you're able to handle more fasting. But if you're not able to handle fasting at all, I would say another way to look at it is to simply see that a large part of your plate is plant-based and from non-starchy vegetables of different colors, which promote a feeling of fullness and keep your blood sugar stable, but they don't really impact your weight. I'm not in favor of calorie counting, calculations. I think it's immensely stressful on people to do that.
Yep. And can be very misleading, because things that are very low in calories can have absolutely no nutritional value.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so I've probably taken up just about enough of your time. It's been so amazing. I'm just so delighted. Thank you. It's just really going to give everybody so much information. So I guess the most important thing to get from you now is how people can work with you or how they can find more information. I know you've got heaps and heaps of blogs on your website which probably cover some more detail on some of these things you've spoken about as well. So what would be the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Thanks, Arwen. It was an absolute pleasure. As I said, whenever someone says women's health, I'm always excited, and I love speaking about hormones. But the people can find me on my main website is www.phytothrive.com, Phytothrive, and the same name for Facebook. And on Instagram, I'm Phytothrive_Yogini. But I'm also, as I mentioned to you, having a targeted sleep nutrition space now, because I feel sleep is the new medicine. And our Instagram page is My Sleep Whisperer, and our website will be ready in 1 week. And our podcast on sleep will launch July 15th. And people can reach me through my website, Instagram, Facebook. wherever it's comfortable.
Okay, great. So, yeah, I mean, I guess the majority of my audience is in Australia and probably New Zealand. Seem to always have a number of people on the other side of the world as well. But regardless of where people are located, I know that you are happy to work with them individually as well. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's amazing. So if anybody out there wants some individual assistance with their hormones, we've found our woman. So that's absolutely amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Deepa. I'm so grateful to have had you on the program, and I'm sure you're going to find that lots of people are getting in touch because they want more detail for themselves.
Thanks, Arwen. Such a pleasure.